All right, guys, so now we've been able to create our error handler, and at least that's out of the way. Now let's go ahead and write the logic to register a user in our database. All right, so I'm just going to get rid of everything you see inside here, and let's get started. So I'll come down. Now this our register user function, it's going to be asynchronous, you know, because the process of interacting with our database is actually going to be asynchronous. So here I will say async, and then if I'm using async, then inside of here I'm going to need to use a try catch block. So try catch, if I want to try if something if I want to like execute a function, it will be inside my try block, and then if there's any error, then I'll just catch it here and do something with that error, right? But instead of having to use try catch block just like we did in the task manager project, every time there's a package, a small package that we can install, and it will save us this stress of having to use try catch block every time we use this asynchronous function. So I'll go to my let me open this guy up, my terminal, and I'm going to install that package, and the name of that package is called async handler. So I'll come here, and I think I need to first be inside my backend folder, so I'll say cd and backend. I'll hit enter. Aha, so we're in the backend folder, so I'll go ahead and install it. I'll say npm install, and the name is express async handler, async handler, like so. I hope I spelled that correctly. I'll hit enter and wait for it to install. Aha, so it has finished installing, and to confirm that it actually installed, you can just check your package.json, and yeah, so package.json, you see now we now have express async handler. Great, so we're good to go. Now let's continue. So I'll close this up. Now with that, first off, I need to import it. So to use it, I'll say const, and I'll just give it async handler, and that's going to be equal to, and I'll just require it. So require, in quotes, you're not going to say express async handler. Yeah, so the way you use this package is that you're just going to wrap everything. So after this equals, you're going to wrap everything here inside this express async handler. Let me show you how you're going to do that. So I'll just come here. So just after the equal sign, I'll come here and say async handler, and then I'll just open my parenthesis. Now everything here will go inside this parenthesis. So technically I can just take the closing parenthesis here and bring it to the end here. Aha, so because I've wrapped everything here, now I can now get rid of this try catch block and continue writing my code without any error. Okay, so now let's continue. Okay, so what we need to do next is we're going to start by getting some information from the body of our request. So for us to create a user, there are three things we need. We need the name of the user, the email of the user, and the password of the user. And everything is going to come from the request.body. Okay, now let's destructure the information. So here I'll say const, and I'll open my square brackets. Okay, I thought it was going to open the second one, and that's going to be equal to request.body. So from the body, I'm expecting at least a name, an email, and a password. All right, if you want to make your sign up form easy, you can just do email and password, and then later on they can add their names and other details, but I'll just use these three because that's what I use in my own project. So now after you have gotten those three things, or hopefully you get those three things, you still want to be able to check that the user did not enter an empty field. So you want to add some validation here. Let me just give some space. So here, let me just come here, bring this in, and then I'll just say that let me add some validation. So just in case they're able to bypass the front end validation, we're going to catch them in the back end. So here, let's open an if statement, and I'll just say that, look, if the user did not enter a name, or if they did not enter an email, or if they did not enter a password, then I don't want to process their request. So I'm going to return, I'll say response. I'm going to return a 400 response. That's bad request. So response dot status and 400. And this is the first point where we're going to use our error handler. So here I'm going to throw a new error, throw new error. And what error message do I want to pass? Well, I want them to fill all fields. So here I'll say, please, you have to be polite with your users. So fill in all required fields. Yeah, something like that. Okay. So about validation, we are starting to validate our request. Remember, I said that it's good to validate both in the front end and on the back end. You can never be too, wrong to be, validation. All right, so let's continue. Now, another thing we want to make sure is that their password is at least up to 6 characters. So you want their password to be at least up to 6 characters. So we're going to validate that. I'll open my if statement and I'll say if password the length is less than 6 characters. So 6. What do I want to do? Well, I'm going to throw an error. So since it's something I've already done here, I'll copy this guy and then I'll paste it here. So it's going to be a 400 bad request error, and then I'll just say password must be up to 6 characters. So password must be up to 6 characters. Okay, so I'll just do these 2 validations and then I'll stop here. Now if you're building a standard application, I'm sure there are a number of other validations you want to do both on your front end and on your back end, but for now I'll just leave it like this and then let's proceed. So now we have come to a point where we've decided that they entered a name, an email and a password, and the password is at least up to 6 characters. What do we want to do next? Well, we want to check if the email that they entered already exists in our database, because remember, a user can only register once and the email must be unique. So here, let me come here, I'll add a comment for you. I'll say check if user email already exists. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'll create a okay, let me just do it first, then I'll assign it to a variable name. So what we're going to do is we're going to await, and then this is when we're now going to use our model. So anytime, remember in the previous project I said that anytime you want to interact with your database on MongoDB, you need to use your model. And what is the model we created for this? It's the user model. So if you come here, you see that we created this user model and we exported it to user. So I'm going to come back here, and the first thing I'll do is I will import that model. So I'll just come here and say capital letter user, and then it will help me to auto import it from where it's located. Yeah, so that's it. So I've imported this user model, which means that I can now access the users in the database. I'll come down here and say await, and then remember I want to check if the email that the user provided already exists in the database. So I'll say await user dot find one. Okay, so I want to find one user, and what do I want to find the user by? Well, I want to find the user by the email, and that's the email that was provided in the request body. So this email here, this one here. Great. All right, so now this statement here, I'll just assign it to a variable. So I'll say const user exists. Okay, all right, so if the user exists, then I'll be able to find that user in my database. All right, so now let's come down. Now if the user exists, what do you want to do? Well, let's handle that. I'll add an if statement and say, look, if user exists, let's open this up, then I want to throw an error that, look, the user already exists. So let's grab this, our error statement. So you see the importance of us creating our custom error handler. We're able to just use it as many times as possible. So I'll come here, paste that in, and then I'll return a status of 404, and then I'll say, look, the user already exists. I'll say user, or I'll say email has already been used. Okay, so that will let the user know that, okay, this email has already been registered, or let me just say has already been registered, like so. Great. So they'll use something else. Great. Now, what if the user does not exist? Well, that is when I want to now create a new user in my database. So here I'll say create new user, and I'm writing this comment so that just for you, so that you can follow, what I'm doing. All right, great. So now how do we create a user? Well, I'm going to say, let me put it inside a variable from the beginning. So I'll say const user, and that's going to be equal to, I'm going to await user. Remember, when you're interacting with the database, you need your model. So we're going to use the user model. So user dot, and I'm just going to say create. Let's open a parenthesis. Now you now need to specify the data with which you want to use to create that user. It's going to be inside an object. So I'll just open this up, and then remember we have three information: the name, the email, and the password. So here I'll say name, I'll add a comma, come down and say email. And remember, in ES6 we have a syntax where if the property name and value is the same, you don't need to specify the the value. You can just say only name. So if I delete this, it's still the same thing. So I'll create the name, the email, and the password. Great. Now this will create a user in our database. Now when we've created a user in the database, let's get the information of that user back. So here I'll come and say if the user was created, so if user, then what do I want to do? Well, like I said, I want to retrieve the information of that user and do something with it. So it's going to be inside a response. So I'll say response dot status, and what's going to be the status code. When you create a new user, 201 represents new user created, or new data that has been created in your database. So 201 dot JSON, because the information we are getting back from our database is going to be in the form of a JSON. So open that up, and what do we want? First off, whenever you create a new data in your database, MongoDB is going to attach an ID property. So let's get that ID dot ID, okay, and then that's going to be equal to user dot ID. All right, then I'll just add a comma here, and then I'll just set the next property. I'll get the name of the user. Let's type that name, and that's going to be equal to user.name. Now the interesting thing is I can actually just destructure all of this property, but let me just write it out so that you can appreciate that it's coming from the users in the database. Or better still, let me just destructure it. So I'll say const, and I'll just destructure all of the properties. So we're going to have a underscore ID property. Then we're going to have a name property. It's going to be equal to user. So underscore ID property, then name property. What else? Email. What else? Well, I don't want to send the password back. Okay, I want to leave that in the database. Then remember, in our model we had some other things that we added, things like the photo of the user, the bio. So let's just return everything just to be sure that everything is on track. So I'll just come here. So the email, then what else? The photo, then I think the phone, then lastly we have the bio. Yeah, so those are the things we have in the database. So here, instead of saying id is equal to user.name, I can just make it short and say id, and then comma, and then essentially I can just grab all of these guys. I'll copy that and then just paste it here. Okay, so you see everything has lightened up because now we are pointing to this data pieces that we destructured from the user. So, but what if the user was not created? What if there was a problem with the data that was supplied and we're not able to create that user? Then let me add an else statement here for that condition, and then I'm just going to say response dot status, and let's just do a 400, and then I'm just going to throw another error. So throw new error. Sorry, let me come back here. Error. What am I going to say? Let's just say that there was an invalid user data. So invalid user data. Okay, so that's about it for creating a user. Now I'm going to say this from this point. There are some things that we've not done. So first off, you don't want to save the user's password exactly as it is in the database. You don't want to do that, right? Also, sometimes when people register, you want to log them in immediately. You don't want them to now have to go back to a login page. It may just be bad user experience. So we're going to do that, but for now, let's just test this and make sure that what we've written so far actually works. So I'll come here, I'll save this file, and let's come back to make sure that our server starts successfully. Aha, so our server has started. So this is moment of truth. So this is the API we're going to test out now. It has an email. So you know what I'll just do? I'll not add anything. Let me see if this our validation actually works. So I will come here and click on send. Aha, so you see, because we did not enter an email or a password and a name field, we got a message here that please fill in all required fields. All right, so now let's enter an email. I'm just going to enter a dummy email. So I'll just say user@gmail.com, and then I would enter a name, and I'll set that name to be, of course, Zeno, because I'm the one doing the. Then I'll enter a password field, and then I'll set the password to be Zeno123. Great. I'll go ahead and click on send. No, let's do something else. Let's make sure that this password is not up to 6 characters. So I'll just say Zeno, and then I'll click on send. Let's watch what happens. Aha, so you see, we get a message here. I hope this thing is not too small. Okay, but I don't know if there's any other way to make it bigger. I guess I'll just have to check after this video. Okay, so I immediately found a way to make it a little bit bigger, the font size of this guy. So I hope you can at least just see it. So here we have password must be up to 6 characters. Okay, great. Now let's make this password 123. So at least it's more than 6 characters, and send, and let's see what we get. Aha, so look at what we have here. We now have a response 201, which means that a new user has been created, and we get the details of the user. So this is the ID, the name, the photo, which is this default, and then the phone number, which is also the default, the bio, which is also the default. Great. So we've been able to at least create a user. To confirm that we actually created that user, let's check our database. So I would open this up, and then I will look inside my MongoDB database. Hopefully I'm not logged out. Great. I'll click on browse collection. So I'm first on database, then I'll click on browse collection. So we are supposed to be in p-invent app. Remember, that's the name we gave this project. So I'll just open this up, and as you can see, inside of the p-invent app, we now have these users, because you know we created a user USER model. When it wants to save that data, it's just going to pluralize it. So USERS, it's just going to add an S to it. So if you click in the p-invent and you click on the users, then let it load. Okay, great. So you see now we now have at least one item in the database. It's Zeno, user@gmail.com, and the password is Zeno123. So everything that we're able to retrieve back from the database is right here. We've confirmed it that it exists. So now we've been able to create a user. In the next video, we're now going to do some other things about this user registration. See you there.